Hi, my name is Holly Antel. This is my second video in a series on the medical theory of psychology, which is my novel theory that I developed to bring medical, falsifiable, and mathematical standards into psychological mental health care. Um, I reached out to four professors yesterday, and at three different universities. And I was very encouraged this morning. I received a reply very early this morning. It was quite unexpected um, from an esteemed professor and a psychiatrist from Harvard University. And getting a personal reply from him was amazing. I'm so grateful for that. Ultimately, the only barrier he cited to engaging with my work was funding constraints at the university. Um, which signaled to me that what I have here is some pretty serious research that I'm proposing and am able to investigate with the methods that I have developed. Um, so just a little thing from the I Ching, since that's really influenced my kind of like binary math and Boolean logic, which is another thing I want to review also is the basics of Boolean algebra and the kind of algebra that's kind of like behind um, the two-step questions that I'm doing, and how I discovered it and stuff like that. So I'm going to share my screen. Auspicious is a word that's found a lot in the I Ching. They talk about auspicion. And if you just go by a quick Google definition, it's a sign of future success or characterized by success or prosperous. Now, with reading the I Ching, um, and like personally, I can be a little superstitious when it comes to things about luck. Like I like things being lucky. Um, and I'm aware of like luck kinds of superstitions and stuff like that. And I know that they're in Chinese culture, they're also very superstitious and focused on luck and lucky things. And I can only presume it relates to numbers like it does with me. And like when you're a math person and you like math and like doing basic math, you can kind of see it everywhere. You become, I think, really attuned almost spiritually to numbers. And so I have a lot of superstitions about luck. So I define auspicious a little differently. I think that auspicious, if something is auspicious, it's like a synchronicity. It's like a personal synchronicity, like a personal lucky thing. Like, 'cause everyone, what people consider lucky is different. Like everyone has a different lucky number or things like that. So it's like whatever that person considers lucky, like a synchronicity that points to like they're on the right track or they're like doing the right thing or that they had a good idea or something like that. So it's a personalized about like your personal like luck tokens and stuff like that kind of popping up in your everyday life. Um, which is like optimistic and encouraging or conducive to success, as its definition says. Um, so I sent these emails at 8:14 um, in the morning because it's part of my uh, I call it Chinese Tropical Astrology, human design. Um, and I just want to do a little bit of a just kind of a logic math background on this, not going into it at all, just from a mathematical standpoint to explain the kind of Boolean algebra that I'm doing. It's easier to teach the basis of Boolean algebra using this than the medical theory of psychology. But this is just explains the underlying math behind the questions, or the underlying like logic system behind the questions with Boolean algebra, which can be expanded on to like do different kinds of like surveys and diagnostics to like locate and identify different pathologies or markers of health in both psychology and medicine. So you're considered to have this is Sun, Earth, North Node, South Node, the rest of the planets. You're considered to have two placements in this astrology, and so mine are in 8 and 14. So those are lucky numbers for me. That's why I sent out my emails at 8:14. I also sent four because of the kind of logic I'm doing. It works out for four results. So it just seems like a lucky number for me when it comes to giving myself chances. So, but I think it was an auspicious time for me to send it out because auspicious can also mean, besides something synchronistic, but just like something of luck that you do that brings you luck, something that you do that to make things auspicious or turn out good for you. So something you do to set yourself up for success, basically. So um, whether it's superstition or it's real, who knows? But it's just a little bit of my quirky personality, which I want to definitely showcase as well as my ability to teach. Because ultimately, as a doing research, I would like to eventually land a professorship somewhere and do teaching as well as researching because I like teaching. It's got to figure out how to make it easier on my voice. But a really quick overview of human design. So it has the 64 hexagrams from the I Ching, um, all labeled out, and these are called channels. What connect, like this is one of the hexagrams or gates when they connect. So 4816 is connected by a channel. And when two centers are connected by one or more channels, they're defined, so they're colored in. And then when they're not connected by a channel, that's done by two or more hexagrams. They are considered open. So it's a logarithmic system, I think. I don't know much about logarithmic math. Total disclaimer, I've only taken pre-calculus as my only college math class. I did good in it, I got a 4.0. But I've never formally studied Boolean algebra. I just started doing it by looking at this from a mathematical standpoint and discovering how I could create my own types based on the solar plexus here and the root here. So these are all named, that's crown, third eye, throat, G, heart, spleen, sacral, solar plexus, and root. And they relate to these variables. So my math just indicates my n variable in my math for both my novel math for my own system, and then this is applying my Boolean algebra to the existing human design systems. So I don't know if what kind of equations they use ultimately to create this. So it tells you like what type you are. I don't know what equations they use. That programming is totally not my field. I don't know how that's done, but this is just kind of a way of looking at these 9 centers and representing them algebraically. My guess is that they're probably done by channel. And that's like one of my next math puzzles after I fully flesh out all the equations for these, is doing my system, but doing it with algebraic representation, and logic variables with the channels. I started messing with that. But in the classic human design system, there are 5 types. 5 types that they talk about. And like I said, the behind the scenes math isn't really exposed or published out there. And it's based on the sacral chakra right here. Mine's open, so I'm a projector type, is what they call it. And all the things are based upon whether or not a person has a sacral activated. So if you have the sacral defined, which would be colored in, mine's open, so it's white. You're considered a generator or manifesting generator, and they comprise about 70% of the population statistically with astrology. So astrology is another logarithm function that goes into play to determine all of these. And so the difference between a manifesting generator and a generator is that a manifesting generator has the sacral defined, and it also has what's called a motor connected to the throat. A motor is what they consider an energetic center, and there's 4 motors. So it's the heart chakra, the root chakra, the solar plexus, and the sacral. So if there's a connection between any of these 4 centers and the throat, it doesn't have to be direct connection, like it can like connect to here and then from here to here, but it has to like it can be connected how my splenic chakra is defined in my G chakra, like it's a single definition channel. but it would have to make a single definition. Even though these are connected, you consider this like it's connected to the G center in one definition. For manifesting generators, it's connected to the throat in one definition. President Trump, for example, is a manifesting generator. So he has a direct channel from one of the motors, the heart, to the throat. And yeah, the solar plexus is also directly connected. Um, a manifester has one of those connections, motor to the throat, but no sacral chakra. And then a reflector has all centers open and no centers defined. So those are the 5 types. And it's just you put in your birth date in this, they have the math behind, like in the behind the scenes programming that generates all of this. So, but the math I'm doing is just based off of, are these open or defined? So I have 3 defined centers. My GN would be 1, my HN would be 1, and my PN would be 1. And then my CN for crown is 0. EN for third eye is 0. RN for throat is 0 because these are all open. Same with these 3. So using that kind of logic reasoning, are the centers open or closed? And then I made a variable of does it connect to the throat? So it's just it's the MT variable, so motor throat connection. So when there is at least, so I could do more granular math that defines using math, like when it, not just saying if it's connected to the throat, 1, if it's not connected to the throat, 0, but that's just like applied logic. So I can make it more applied math instead of applied logic by defining what, like in math, what it means to be connected to the throat. Instead, I'm kind of skipping it and being like, when it's connected to the throat, it represents this in math. So to get to the math, so I'm defining the existing human design system using 3 variable logic using Boolean algebra. So here's kind of the step-by-step way that I do it. And I created all of this myself. None of this stuff is published about their math. I don't know what kind of math they do. So I create 3 variables, which can only be 1 or 0. And then I work them together in an equation where whether they're 1 or 0 matters to determine the different types. So for MT, the variable MT, which ends up being the Y variable, for it to equal 1 instead of 0, it means there's at least 1 motor connected to the throat. So for Donald Trump, who has a motor connected to the throat, his MT would be 1. For me, I'm a projector, I don't have a motor to the throat, my MT would be 0. And it's not, it doesn't go more mathematically granular. Like I said, it's just a logic statement based on how the charts are done. But it can be represented in math. And the second variable is the DC variable. It stands for defined centers. And it's just a simple, when there are any defined centers except for the sacral center, it's a 1. And then when there are no defined centers whatsoever, it's a 0. And so one note is that for X to be 1, or which is, oh, I don't think I wrote that out. Oh, I did. X equals Sn. So X is just looking for whether or not the sacral is open or defined. MT is asking, is there 1 motor connected to the throat or is there no motors connected to the throat? And then DC is asking, are there any defined centers except for the sacral? Or are there no defined centers whatsoever? So DC is like, it can be 1 if the sacral is defined, but if the sacral is defined, it will always be defined to another center. So DC will always be 1 in a chart. X will always be 1. So when the sacral is active, there will always be another center besides the sacral that is active, because the sacral needs to connect to at least one other center in order to be defined. So there will always be one other center besides itself that it connects to if it is defined. So DC always has to be one. F always has to be one. Um, if X is one, it follows that F must be one. So when X is 0, F doesn't have to be one, but when X is 1, F has to be one. Logically. So those are the three logic variables then. So is there a motor connected to the throat or not? Are there any defined centers except for the sacral center? And then is the sacral defined? Is the X variable? SN is whether the sacral is defined. So for a manifesting generator, all manifesting generators types will have a 1 for each variable. X will be 1, Y will be 1, F will be 1. For all generator, because X is 1 because the sacral center is active. Y will always be 1 because for a manifesting generator, there means there has to be a motor connected to the throat. And then DC is 1 because the throat is a defined center. So for the both variables to follow, that one must follow, as well as for the sacral to be defined at all, it has to be defined. And there are more than one. There's more than just the sacral center active. So they all have that one variable. And then for generator types, X equals 1, X will always equal 1, F will always equal 1, but Y will always equal 0. They might have the throat defined or not, but what it's looking for is there a motor connected to the throat? And if they're a generator type, then no, there's never a motor connected to the throat. So that will always be Y0. And then for them to be a generator, they have to have the sacral defined. So it follows that sacral must be defined to another center. So that will always be 1 for generator types. For manifestor types, X is always 0. So there are more discrete combinations of these three variables, but as it pertains to the human design system, there are only 5. So you can create a system where X, can be 1 and F be 0 because it means something else, but because it applies to something mathematical and logical in the human design system, it can't work. But this kind of algebra is flexible, so you can make different things with it. So all types will be one of these, we'll create one of these combinations of X, Y, and F. And even though there are more combinations of X, Y, and F that are possible as it pertains to human design, we'll only make these 5. So that's only kind of 5 equations you got to build for. And all charts will fall into one of 5 types. So for the manifestor, the SN is 0, X is 0, so the sacral center is 0. They have no defined sacrals. It makes them manifestors. They still have a motor connected to the throat, which is the Y variable. It's why they're manifestors. The motor connected to the throat without the sacral. And then because the throat's active and any centers are active besides the sacral, the F is always 1. So they will always do that. For all projector types, X will always be 0, Y will always be 0, and F will always be 1. So they have, us projectors, we have no sacral, and we also have no motor to the throat. So, but we have other defined centers. What's what separates us from reflectors who have no defined centers, and all of their variables are 0. But so we have defined centers, but we don't have the sacral defined, and we don't have a motor defined to the throat. So motor defined at the throat is the Y variable, and then having the sacral center defined as the X variable. Those will always be 0 for projectors, but we'll always have some centers defined, because if we didn't, we'd be reflectors without any centers. So we'll always have F equals 1. And then reflectors have all 0s. So since all 5 types have different combinations of these, you can build equations that all other chart types. This is like kind of more the computer programming part. Boolean logic is like the foundation of like most programming, if not all programming. I don't know enough about programming to say it's all, but I know it's most at least. So this is very foundational logic for a lot to do with computers. So this is how you would build equations to like it takes the astrological data, maps it onto the human design data, maps it onto my map, creates a result. So this would go kind of in the behind the scenes math um, for these logarithm things that can generate these. Um, so here's an equation that only the manifesting generator types would pass the equation. So the equation is just a simple algebra equation. X plus y plus f divided by 3 equals 1. So you want to have it so that all three variables are 1. So that they divide by 3 to equal 1. If you do projector type where x and y are both 0, it would be 1 divided by 3. It would give an answer of 1/3, which would fail the equation. And all the other types have at least 1 0. So it only works with manifesting generator types that would have all 3 ones. So this is like a 3 variable logic. And it just, the variables are looking for yes, no, true, false. In this case, it's a center open or closed. So only the ones in the all 3 of these would pass this equation so that it can be divided by 3 and equal 1. And this is kind of like different than my normal math goes. I usually skip to the next step and I explain it. Because I only did one equation so far. I have to think on these for a little bit. They're like fun little puzzles for me. But I could do this part is relatively easy. Creating just a simple algebra equation where these have to be 1 or 0 in order for the equation to work out. And no other combinations will work to produce a true equation. So naturally I started with the all ones and the all zeros, pretty easy, right? If any of these are 1, it'll equal 1, not 0, so only reflector types. We'll go through that. The manifestors and generators, both only they have 2 of the variables. So it's kind of the same equation, but because the variables are different, they'll only pass in their respective types. So y is 1, plus x is 1, minus 0 is 2. So if you put in a 1 or a 0 in any other way except 1, 1, 0, it will not equal 2, and then it will fail and not register as a manifestor chart type. And then it's just switched around because they have 2 out of the 3, and the generator also have 2 out of the 3, but it's a different 2 out of the 3, so x plus f minus y equals 2. These have to be 1 and this has to be 0 for that equation to work, for it to equal 2. And then for projector, same thing. A 1 in here. A 1 in either of these will make it 0. 1 in both of it will make it -1. Only 1 minus 0 minus 0 will make it 1. So that's how you can do the kind of Boolean logic for that. And then how I do it on my own novel math theory is I will do an equation on both sides. So instead of it equaling an integer here, like I did with equaling 1, I'll have it equal an equation that uses the variables in a different way, but to add up to the same number. So it's just like in these equations, when you plug in the variables, you want it to result in the same number on both sides, and that's what pass or fails. Whether or not something fits into the logarithm, I don't know. I need to do more math research to figure out what I'm doing. I got the important part down. Formalities, I'm a little behind on, but hopefully I'll get back into school soon. And so for this one, I just took this one, and then on the other side, if you do 3x times y times f, it should work out to be 3. But it will only work if any of these end up being 0, because it's multiplication and will always equal 0. And so you want both sides to equal 3. So this will equal 0 if they're not all 1. And then this will equal a fraction if they're not all 1. So in order for the manifesting generator type to go through, it has to be all 1s for these variables instead of zeros. And then I take it so that like I use each, I might do different like multiplication, addition, division, and subtraction will be different on both sides how I do it, but I'll always use the same variables. So I use x, y, f, and then the number 3. So the other side will have 3x, y, f, just in a different arrangement using algebra, different algebraic arrangement. So this is the first thing I kind of discovered how to do with math, and I'm like, oh, this is cool, discrete math. I see it's a valuable math out there. I wonder how I can apply it. And so I really got involved with creating the equations. Get to a test. So I apply that kind of algebraic logic here when I do the survey math model. It's just the initial so far I'm just using 2 equations. I'll probably create a couple more, but it's with that kind of variable. I have 2 variable logic, so I might create some 3 variable logic. But it's usually the math models just represent these 2 equations. But this just reduces it to like really easy software implementation and stuff like that because it uses binary logic, which is like um all computer stuff. But this is just a fancy way of using the XY variables from the survey just to plug straight into an equation to give what rating it is. So it's math through and through. Yes, that is the math underpinnings for this. So this test has both, I think this one does oh, it does do a falsifiable good. The 2x plus y. So to begin on my survey portion of this video demonstration, I wanted to go through the questions and why I think they are legitimate questions to capture the kind of behavioral patterns, neuroses, and decision-making habits that I'm trying to locate. So I look at, let's see, the cluster B test. There's 3 main tests I would use to qualify someone for like medical entheogens. The cluster B versus cluster Y test is the most important one. I don't think cluster Y personalities would benefit from entheogen use medically or recreationally. I'm not sure. That's a different type of population. This is more focused on what I've been exposed to in terms of like academics as well as my personal life, which is like CPTSD or PTSD recovery and stress-based disease. I really think it's cluster B. So the first main test is the cluster B or cluster Y. And the first cluster B question is, do you want to live in a society that shares all abundance fairly and equally and works to eradicate all unnecessary suffering? So I characterize cluster Bs as all answering yes, yes. We recognize that society is unhealthy and we'd like to fix it and make it equitable and healthy for everyone on this planet. So, and then no is the cluster Y. So, getting a CB of 1 means like kind of possibly able to like work through coaching and treatment and medical intervention. I consider all cluster Y pathology. I consider a pathology to want to live in a harmful and toxic society. to want that. I don't think that's healthy. So I consider it pathological. So I consider anyone that ends up on this side as not cluster B. So it technically only rules out there is no presence of the cluster B disorder when both questions are answered no. But I do think people in cluster Y, if they are honestly seeking these types of relationships, that can motivate wanting to kind of move the belief and mood system from up here onto the other side. So there's probably some potential there. But 2 and 4, or I'm sorry, 2 and 3 is what I qualify as cluster B personality. So for somebody to qualify, I think, for benefit, like from a biological standpoint, from entheogen use, they would need to fall on this side of the spectrum. The second question is, do you desire more than one intimate relationship in your life? And that intimate relationships can be of any type and are defined by honest communication with respect to respective boundaries and with fair and mutual healthy benefits. I was really trying to summarize, what a general healthy relationship looks like, whether it's with your mom, your kid, your colleague, or your romantic partner. And that is, I think the kind of the quickest, most concise way to define a healthy relationship. So seeking that. And I still qualify people who don't seek that as cluster B because there can be many reasons why they don't. If they care about living in a healthy society with healthy overall interpersonal interactions, this could be like trust issues, history of abuse, stuff like that. People might just be a little more closed off, which is understandable given their personal history. So I score, me personally, answer yes to both questions. So I score CV3. I want a healthy society, so I'm doing work like this. And I try to keep my relationships up to this metric as much as I can. So, that is who I am. And then they just kind of like states it out in a formal way. So once they test a 2 or 3 here, then they can take the F score. Because technically the way I order it is the CB score has to be 2 or 3, and the F score has to be 1, 2, or 3 to qualify for entheogens for medical use. But I think people can have a history of an F score instead of an occurring one. Like they don't have utility. That's the goal, to eliminate that for everyone. But people don't have futility or score with having high stress. But they've had a history of enduring it for a long period of time. They would still qualify for cluster B, and entheogens would be healthy for them, whereas I don't think they're healthy for cluster Y populations. I think you have to be down with really kind of like, look at psychedelics as the hippie drug. It's about cooperation and mind expansion and, appreciating yourself within, a collective environment and stuff like that. It's really about, bridging community and interpersonal relationships in a good collective, consciousness, stuff like that. So, people who are against that kind of equality and things like that, they're I don't know what the use of those kinds of substances and types of expansion of consciousness kind of things, how that could benefit them. And also like cluster B is a pathology, I understand. Many people, I think, who have cluster B personality disorders, people who have been diagnosed or claim themselves to have a cluster B personality disorder, they tend to be a little bit more aware of their own pathologies and their own I do have problems with mood or my emotions that I want to recover from, or they can look at themselves. I think people self-reflect and come across a cluster B, and that self-reflection is really healthy. But I've had a lot of exposure to cluster B type relationships, and I've dealt with cluster B. I thought I was quiet borderline. My therapist did not think I was borderline. But I'm not a high conflict person when it comes to relationships, but I definitely, the way they described mood and stuff like that with the borderline personality and just, weaknesses with, invalidation, rejection, stuff like that, was really relatable. But so I'm most familiar with cluster B pathologies, cluster B behaviors, and types and stuff like that. Having gone through it myself and having relationships with other people who have it and have, been are self-claimed borderlines and stuff like that. Um, I think borderline is a most socially acceptable one. Um, but I really want to get rid of the stigma surrounding all four and have them be seen as cool. But the most stigma is probably around my type, which is narcissist. Um, but it would make sense to me that I felt the kind of like how the feeling stuff are described with people who've researched cluster or borderline personality disorder. But because like behaviorally I was much different than classic borderline, um, it indicates that I was narcissist, which is just different. Um, yeah, so I personally have experience with just, therapy, seeing the same people for a number of years. I wasn't one of those ones who skipped it. I took it seriously in terms of self-reflection and coaching and stuff like that. And just in my relationships and what I've studied in academia and then what I've like looked up and researched on my own independently. I just feel much better discussing the cluster B dynamic and through that framework. And I don't feel comfortable recommending treatment for people who are in cluster Y. Um, or think of ideas for that. With more like education and access and research, definitely. But for right now, I want to stick to what I'm comfortable with and what I'm most familiar with. So the next part, once you have a CV score of 2 or 3, and then an F score of 1, 2, or 3, I'll get to the F score next. There's three. I might want to reframe these tests better because I'm trying to search for codependency versus independent, and then introvert versus extrovert. But there's 3 surveys, 2 questions each. Um, X variables always the independent versus codependent, and the Y variables always introverted versus extroverted. Um, so question 1, given financial freedom, would you prefer to live with someone you feel neutral about or dislike rather than live alone? Me, that's a hard, I would rather live alone than someone I dislike or don't vibe with. And then I would argue that I put financial freedom because I think the problems with money in society and stuff like that, like money forces codependency and it forces like cohabitation and stuff like that. Like sometimes you got to do it to survive. Um, so that's why I put given financial freedom because like some people might be independent, but like I'd be homeless if I wasn't living with someone I disliked right now. Um, that's why I put that specifically in the question because it's like that happens all the time. You live with someone you don't like because you have no choice, especially in economically stressed communities. Um, So that's why I put in there, given financial freedom. And that's what like makes these questions, I think, really cool to kind of like play around with or think about. I'd be especially interested in developing questions to locate like existing things, whether like, go through the DSM, see what's helpful there, and like develop this kind of like diagnostic or two-step Boolean logic, or even create, 3 and 4 variable logic, in order to locate behavioral, emotional, mood, and decision-making things. Um, so specifying financial freedom here says a lot and it changes the question a lot. Um, because if you're just asked where you prefer to live with someone you feel miserable about or dislike rather than live alone, uh, prefer kind of implies it, but I think really specifying, financial freedom since that's not something people can avoid. Um, but given financial freedom, I think if you still want to live with someone you don't like or just feel whatever about, they're just kind of there, that indicates a codependency. That indicates you want someone there just to have someone there. I talk about codependency being a pathology because it's like you form relationships based upon like your perceived ability to hold on to them or have them be whatever stable you need in terms of financial, emotional, and other types of security, um, rather than happy relationships with the quality of the relationship and being selective on relationships based on relationship quality. I haven't really talked about it in my theory yet, but I plan on a lot like relationship selectivity as a very healthy thing. Um, but people who are codependent, they tend to lack relationship selectivity. Um, and just do it because, beats being on the streets. but there is some of that, but actually wanting to because you get scared at night, you're sleeping in a place alone or something like that, you have like these unresolved fears and attachment issues with having another person present. Um, which I also speculate on a very side tangent is object permanence, like where it's located in terms of child development would be in the object permanent stage. Um, I'm very I think object permanence is a lot uh they're responsible for a lot of pathologies. And so I have a little nephew, he's a baby, so I did the peekaboo with him and talk about object permanence a lot. So well with my mom. Like, yeah. Remember when our grandparents used to put on like little when I was little I looking back on it now, my grandparents, they both passed on. I love them though. Um miss them. And growing up, they used to get like a little Dixie cup and like get some floss and like put it on, like draw a little pig nose on the Dixie cup and do that. And like my sister and I would laugh at it and stuff like that. And I was like, I think they do like the clown nose in psychology or, but it was like, oh, that's the object. They were, I don't know if they're smart people, so it could have been intentionally like, helping develop our object permanence, but putting on like a nose or like you're distorting your face a little bit to like a baby or a small child and having them have a positive reaction is a good indication of like healthy object permanence. But I think object permanence, attachment theory is interesting. I think there could be some definite truth to a lot of what's said about attachment theory. I haven't looked at attachment theory in a minute to see how they break it down. I forget if it's 4 different attachment types. I think it is. Um, So it'd be cool to like look at attachment theory, for example. Um, I am curious if it's 4. That's what I thought. So yeah, I could easily develop questions where like it could be asked of I don't know for attachment theory you want to for like you should do want to talk about it with the children and adults, but like gear it towards parents. Questions like these for parents or direct to the person being asked. Um, so yeah, I could see what the axes is. Secure, anxious, or preoccupied, avoidant, or dismissive. So secure is falsifiable. Um, Anxious or preoccupied, avoidant or dismissive and disorganized. So yeah, this would be a falsifiable one. So this is not a falsifiable one. So it'd be like this, where 0 will be the healthy one. Um, so this would be secure attachment. And then fearful, avoidant. Okay. So where they have anxious, I would probably put fearful. So fearful, avoidant, and then yeah. So I do questions to see are they so the first question would be like, are they avoidant or engaged? So is the baby paying attention or is their behavior primarily like paying attention? Um, and engaging with their environment, or are they not engaged with their environment and not paying attention? So that would be avoidant or not. And then a question about fear. Like, are they worried, anxious, crying, behaving as if they're scared? Yes or no? Yeah, that's how you could do it. And then answering no to both, so they're not anxious or scared, and they're not avoiding interaction with their environment and surroundings and other people. And that would be the secure attachment. So 0, 0. And then if they're fearful but they're engaged with their environment, that would be the anxious type. And then you have on the other side, it would actually go in this order too. Um, you have avoidant, which is they would answer no to the second question about fear, so they just have the avoidant. And then the last one, they would have the question positive for the avoidant and then question positive for fearful, and it'd be disorganized. So yeah, attachment theory could plug easily into my questions. And I thought of two randomly that might work to like locate um behavior on whether they're interacting with their environment and other people within it, and if they're doing so in a scared way or a curious way. I feel like curiosity is what you want instead of fear or anger. You want to go for curiosity is the emotion you're going for. So they're curious, or are they not? And then are they scared? Like, are they curious because they're scared or just curious? Or if they're not curious, it'd be on the avoidance side. So it would, so this would be secure. I should do an F square because it's where you want the 0. So this would be secure or no pathology. This would be anxious but engaged, curious about their environment, but also fearful. And then on this side, this would be avoidant. So not engaged with their environment, not curious about their environment, but no fear. And then this has both fear. They're not engaging with their environment and then they're also scared. So that would be the disorganized, avoidant, anxious, secure. So yeah, attachment theory could definitely work with this model. But back to my model, after you indicate cluster B, you can indicate the futility score. Might as well do that. Do you doubt your ability to keep yourself safe, sheltered, and fed this month? Do you mistrust your survival? Your X is 1. If you don't, if you feel confident in doing that, X is 0. And then do you frequently mistrust your personal safety within the environment you are currently in, work in, or live in? That I think that's a good question. It's where I tested adaptive futility. And you think about Black women at the workplace. They might have like what they can like what other people consider a safe workplace, but because they're at the intersection of race and gender at the workplace, they might be, targeted for microaggressions or active aggression and stuff like that. And they could experience active aggression because of, their proximity to wherever they're at. And so it's like I don't want to doubt that person feels unsafe, whatever their circumstances might be. I don't want to necessarily have them, tell all, spill all the tea, why aren't they feeling safe, stuff like that. I'm not sure how I feel about like talk therapy and things like that. I don't know how effective that is. Um, but just, trusting that like, yes or no, do you feel safe? And not like there might be make an option like, is there anything you want me to do to help you with that or something like that. But just like, if people don't feel safe and like there's only so much advice you can give, there is a certain futility of like they have to deal with their lives, and there's only so much a provider can do to help them with that. So I think like not getting so I don't know how healthy it is to just like ask them to reveal, why do you feel that way and stuff like that. That can I think be invalidating in some ways too. Um, but there are so many different reasons and ways that people might, as long as they're being honest with themselves and because they're not being asked to reveal, well, why for either question, um, unless they want to. But in developing ways they do how to handle that in an appropriate way. Um, but I trust that, they deal with issues of feeling unsafe and they deal with issues of, wondering if they're going to make it or survive or whatever, feed themselves next month. So having any kind of futility or history of futility, which I talk about, futility being kind of a positive thing. Futility to me is like you're accepting something that you don't want to accept. Um, you're not trying to change it. You're not trying to avoid it or whatever. It's just like, I have to get up for work tomorrow. I'm going to go to bed. Like, that's utility. In a not necessarily a pathological way, but in a generalized way to understand the word. Um, so having a history of any kind of futility ongoing, especially, will cause high stress, living under high threat. And so, well, I think for to justify entheogen treatment based on mitigating the impacts of a high threat, high stress environment, um, to prescribe, I would probably recommend some kind of F score. But I, if someone's a cluster B, they classify as cluster B, then entheogens are healthy for recreational or medical use. Um, so yes. Another thing is the question strength. So I think like because I say codependency is a pathology, I think it's the most important thing to locate. So I put it the X question is the most impactful thing. And just by the logic of these kinds of questions, making this most impactful question makes it just so automatically rates itself on a scale. For the falsifiable test, this is an indicator test. Um, so it's kind of like, but it indicates codependency. So it's like if you don't want to test on this side, um, just because of that codependent factor. Having forming relationships because they give you some kind of security, and that's it. Not because you like the relationship or it gives you anything besides some kind of like physical security. Um, will have relationships of that caliber, even if it can be avoided financially. Um, Spirit answered that question. Where I, I'm a narcissist. This one, social strategy type, extrovert, introvert. It's a romance related question, which might not quite gauge it, but oh no, this is a different one. This is, do you prefer to have more than one or two other friends? For me personally, I like having friends and being friendly with people at work and stuff like that. I like having quality, meaningful, good relationships. Um, so I'm a narcissist. Whereas antisocial types and histrionic types, yeah, histrionic types are a little different than antisocial because that codependency, they'll put themselves out there and talk to a lot of people. When it comes to people they actually like trust or like real stuff too, it tends to be much fewer. Whereas antisocial, I don't think they're getting attention. They're less comfortable with attention, or they're not uncomfortable with it, but it's not necessarily healthy. Um, Given financial freedom, do you generally feel unsafe while both living alone and not having regular visitors? Um, if you don't feel safe alone and you only feel safe if someone else is in the house with you, I would say that's codependency. And it's a pretty easy way to measure that whether or not, that's a phenomenon you experience. Feelings of unsafety when you're alone. Um, my answer is no. I live alone right now. Love it so much. And given financial freedom and safety, do you prefer having a pet? Yes. For me, definitely. I'm a huge cat person. I don't have any cats right now because I don't have financial freedom. I'm looking for research opportunities or a job. But I do prefer having a pet. And then this is kind of based off of my other theory of trypophobia because I think antisocials and histrionics will have complex trypophobia. So they're going to be trypophobic with animals. So I think they don't prefer animals. So this isn't necessarily looking for extroversion versus introversion, though it could be because like, having a meaningful relationship with an animal can be like a sign of intro or extroversion rather. Um, but it's also kind of with that other kind of theory I have going with the study I want to set up. And then, given financial freedom and personal safety, will you maintain a happy relationship with a child, sibling, parent, spouse, etc.? Uh, Not me. Um, I only maintain relationships that I want to maintain. Um, so I'm not a codependent. And then this is the one I thought was on the other slide. This is the one I was talking about. Do you typically seek romantic long-term relationships? I rated this an extroversion, a marker of extroversion to seek long-term relationships. That might not necessarily be the case, but I feel like with histrionics, they might seek like long-term like roommates or partners, something like that, but it's not necessarily romantic. They're not like really revealing their heart to them. Um, so they're like almost like they're too scared to put their heart out there for real romance. That's how I kind of say histrionics. Um, and then antisocial, I think they just avoid it altogether. Um, so it's not technically directly related to extroversion, introverted, but I think when considering these two types of introverts, um, that pattern will show up. So that's where my questions can be a little bit more flexible and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily locating this, but it could be, but I would have like whether this is a valid locator question for extroversion, I'd want to like do tests. Um, and also like do research, like, does this seem accurate? And then this is just to just add up the scores. Because some people they might answer, I answer all three in the narcissist rating. But some people might answer, different ones. They could have three different answers. But even if they have three different answers, they will have X and Y values that are either because it's three tests. So we're going to have 3x. So they either get 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3, and either codependent or independent. And then same for the social strategy, they either get 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3. So if someone, for example, answered antisocial, narcissist, and histrionic, they would their final score would be antisocial. Um, because they answered X equals 0 twice. So if they got narcissists, they answered independent for 2 of the questions, and they answered codependent for 1 of the questions. So they're on this side. And then they answered antisocial, narcissist, and histrionic once. And so antisocial and histrionic are both introvert. That's the 2 out of 3, narcissist extrovert. So 2 out of 3 were independent, and then 2 out of 3 2 out of 3 were independent, and then 2 out of 3 were introverted. So someone who tests for antisocial, narcissist, histrionic will always rate as antisocial. Someone who tests for narcissist, histrionic, borderline will actually be borderline. So 2, 3, if they tested 2 out of 3, then histrionic and borderline are both codependent. So they did that, and then extroversion would be the 2 out of 3 there. So, I'm guessing most people will end up with like 1 or 2 different types. Um, but they could end up with all three and it will point to a specific one, no matter what. Um, so, and there's different ways you could like format this to like make it read easier. When I was doing research at the University of Michigan, it was a lot easier. Like what they have on Google Forms and like Canva right now for free is not like what I need to like 2 questions give a result, 2 questions give a different result, and then have all the results show on the same page. I know it can be done with like universities, stuff like that, but with the free stuff out there, I'm on a little bit of a budget. I just can't create the surveys I want to do like start doing independent research. Um, So I have people test with the F score, the CB score, and then if they have a CB and HS, which is a personality type, and then an F score. So CB is just cluster B or not. HS is like which one of the 4 personality types are you? And then the F score is do you have, uncontrollable, unchanging stress and threat factors in your life? Which I think many people do, especially intersections of race and poverty, labor, stuff like that, but especially race. This is the anxiety or anhedonia axis screening. Um, Do you feel the need to excessively preen, such as maintain excessive makeup or hygiene standards and keep your house excessively clean or keep things organized? For me, yes. I have not always been this way. I was a messy person for most of my life, but I've recently become a very neat and clean person. Um, I'm not like I'm definitely maintain my hygiene. I'm not obsessed about hygiene, but I maintain it. I rarely wear, I'm decided to wear makeup today. But I rarely wear makeup. And then do you get angry or irritated when someone knocks on your door or rings your doorbell unexpectedly? And for me, yes. So I have psychopathic anxiety. Um, so this talks a lot about baseline mood. This talks about like when you get that baseline mood right up to like the threat or threat level response. Um, I actually I had water delivered today, and I thought it was coming tomorrow, Sunday, delivered it a day early, and I had an unexpected knock at my door. Um, and it was a gentleman neighbor, elderly gentleman. He had brought up using one of the carts my water, but he banged on the door really loud. It kind of sounded like a cop. And so I wasn't doing anything wrong, but it's just that fight or flight activation. Um, And so I didn't get angry necessarily, but I got into that fear state. I got the fight or flight activation because it was just like a pounding. It was just like he had that cart with the water bottles or whatever, but it's just like, when you hear a loud pounding at the door, you think, is there an emergency? Something wrong? Like what's going on? And I wasn't expecting a package till tomorrow, but I had that like flight or fight activation by the knock at the door. Um, so I might update this to angry, irritated, or fearful, actually. I had the document open. Google Slides is so cool because you can like almost build your own website, like a very basic, Flash or HTML website, but for free, just using the Google Suite. Um, oh wait, it's not on the master one. It's different one. So yeah, so I'm gonna update that because I thought about it before, but yeah, I get either angry or irritated. Um, if I get an unexpected knock at the door. I'm like, why are you bothering me? Another housekeeping inspection. I keep it so clean. Um, but that time, so it was a rather loud knock. I got like scared. But I think the fear counts as something in terms of anxiety, psychopathy versus anhedonia or psychosis. So yeah, you get that mood spike of fear versus like a just whatever someone's knocking at the door. So no, like kind of a no variation of mood versus a variation of mood that for an unexpected knock that's fearful or angry. Um, so, so yeah, that's part of it. So I was in that fight or flight mode, and I was fine with him. He wanted to talk for a few minutes. I was trying to like politely, like I have to get back to my work. I'm about to record something. I was about to start recording, and that happened. So it was very, very auspicious timing that it happened before I started recording. But I just kind of like I had that nervous energy of the fight or flight activation. So it'd be like the state of psychopathy. And it didn't make me like behavioral hostile towards him or anything like that. But like after the encounter I had to like clean I cleaned my place. Um like did all my dishes and like wiped down my surfaces and just like made my bed gathered my laundry. Like I just like I cleaned my house just to get rid of that anxious energy. So it was like the fight or flight activation. I dealt with the non-threat, but it just the loud knock at the door was scary. Um, and then just to get rid of that excess energy, I cleaned as a healthy way to like get rid of it. Um, so I don't think that this is like necessarily negative energy or unhealthy energy. That's why I call it like adaptive. Um, because like if you have that CV score, HS score, and F score, you're going to have one of these. It's not falsifiable. Presumed you have either anxiety or depression or anhedonia. Um, but yeah, you know, cleaning my place really quick and straightening stuff up and like doing all that is a healthy way to like get rid of that fight or flight activation. Um, but normally when it's not like the police sounding pounding, it's just irritating. But um I chose this question because someone knocking on your door unexpectedly is like supposed to be like just below that kind of fight or flight activation. So it kind of triggers it a little bit. And it's so like, the aggravated kind of gets close to the aggravated mood, or it might even jump into the aggravated mood. Um, so something unexpected happening with like, a loud noise or whatever. Any knock kind of sounds loud if you aren't expecting it and you're like concentrating on something else. And it's like, oh, what's that? So I wanted to capture a situation, a hypothetical situation that we've all reasonably experienced, and talks about that mood where it's kind of fight or flight, kind of not, can go either way, to capture whether this baseline mood spikes with psychosis or psychopathy. Um, and psychopathy is prone to the more the fight or flight activation, more the fear engaged. There's still fear with anhedonia and psychosis, especially in psychosis, but with psychopathy, it's really being in tune with it. And then this is an interesting question to kind of explain. I use Caucasian woman uh, to avoid any claims of reverse racism. I use Caucasian women because generally Caucasian women are get they have the most privilege of any female intersection. If you look at if you study that kind of anti-racism and the phenomena of racism and stuff like that, white women are the most privileged, and they get the most help and security. They have the most financial security, the best health statistics and metrics, stuff like that. So, and this talks about a crime of money, a property crime. So, I don't describe, it's a hypothetical. It's supposed to be a hypothetical question that is a fight or flight activation. So you see someone get harmed right in front of you, it's going to activate your fight or flight if it's working correctly. So that's why I did that as the initial question, because we're trying to talk about the aggravated mood, which is the fight or flight mood. So it's not happening to you, but happening to someone else. Um, so so it's a non-violent property crime, but a shocking one enough to cause that fight or flight arousal. Um, so I see it like if it's of least consequence for a white person to get mugged than another person of color, because they have the most, economic kind of stability in our society in order to recover from it. So that's why it's like I I would laugh. Another thing too is that I see laughter as healthy. So I think adaptive psychopathy is the healthiest thing to be in. Which I could reformat it to make a falsifiable question, but some people might have a hard time laughing after a negative experience. Um, but I think it's always like healthy. Like if you experience that fight or flight activation, to laugh it off somehow. Like laughter, I really see as an important medicine. Being able to laugh at yourself is very important for healthy self-esteem. Being able to take like failures and setbacks and pride and like, little failures and upsets of life, being able to laugh at them. I think that indicates a really healthy personality and self-esteem. And it's also really good in terms of trauma survival and stuff like that, like being able to laugh about kind of darker things or traumatic and upsetting things as a way to know that you found closure on it. I really associate being able to laugh at something, especially if it's been like emotionally bad for you, to be able to make a joke about it and to laugh about it. Something traumatic you've been through, to be able to joke about it and actually have a genuine laugh. That really shows that you've really recovered as much as you can from that trauma if you can laugh at it in a genuine way. in a genuine way is like you're not going to get offended people or laugh, they tell a story or make a comment about it. And it's meant for others to laugh at too. Like you wouldn't be upset if people like found your humor funny. Um, and so I see laughter is very, very healthy. And in this case, it's like after you're dealing with like a threat or threat thing, flight or flight threat response, to laugh it off after the fact. I definitely laughed off, thinking the little old man was some big bad cop at my door. So being able to laugh off the fight or flight experience shows like a acceptance and a healing of it, and I think is really healthy. Um, but I rate the first question as the most significant one instead of the laughter. Um, and I rate both of these as the unhealthy or mitigating versions. Simply because this can be a scam. Seeing someone get mugged like that or something like that, involving yourself, like seeking trouble. When trouble's sleeping, don't wake it, is what I say. And but seeing trouble and involving yourself poses like you put yourself vulnerable to the situation. You know, if he comes back mad with a gun, like if you just walk your own way, mind your own business, you wouldn't be harmed. But if you're there helping out someone you don't even know, you know, you could get hurt, put into harm's way, or she could be scamming you. So it's unhealthiest to intervene in that situation. Um, is the biggest problem. So that's why, and everyone wants to be a good person and stuff like that. And you look at bystander intervention, but like I mean, if it was really bad, but you can always call 911 from a distance and not go and get yourself involved. Instead of like intervening, and it might specify. Because if someone like were to walk away and call 911, I would still call it as no, like not getting yourself, putting yourself in harm's way is the nuance there. Which I think it's bad to put yourself in harm's way to help someone else. Um, Help someone else is fine, but to put yourself in harm's way to do it. Um, the Secret Service are well respected because they do that. You know, they're expected to put their and a lot of other law enforcement. I do a lot of videos geared towards law enforcement for that reason because they are exposed to that constant high stress. But yeah, putting yourself in harm's way for someone else is a noble thing, but most of us aren't equipped, and it's not generally healthy to do that. The goal is we have a society where people don't need to do that. Um, we don't live in utopia, we live in this society. Um, so I think the overall healthiest thing is adaptive psychopathy in this situation. But I would rate adaptive psychosis um definitely healthier than intervening, even if you laugh afterwards, intervening, not good, not healthy. So, but that's why I put it as the most weighted, so to speak, in terms of value question, that X variable. But I think in terms of emotional resilience, it's more important to laugh than not. So it's also a very important variable. I test that out in my self-esteem tests about laughing at yourself because that's harder to be able to accomplish. You should be able to laugh at yourself before you're laughing at others, stuff like that. But ultimately, even if you do see something bad, I think it's healthy to laugh about it later. Because it's just the body's emotional way of healing that. And just like, I'm fine, I survived, it just kind of releases that energy. So this is just my results here. And then really quick, this is the pathology screening. So this is for screening for those kind of classic cluster B traits. I hate you, don't leave me. And seeing people through a lens of all bad, all good, stuff like that. So those kind of classic borderline behaviors and stuff like that, which can emerge in all four cluster B types, is what I'm trying to locate here. So it's a tendency to have those kind of hostile relationships, and kind of like fighting and unhealthy patterns. Um, Overall, this kind of stuff, my goal is to like locate things as quickly, easy, and non-invasively as possible in terms of like how personal the questions are and how many questions how many questions does it take to successfully indicate anxiety, depression, psychosis, psychopathy, cluster B personality, the fewest possible. But like the most comprehensive types of questions possible, I think is important in the goal. Um, so as I was just talking about the self-esteem screening, do you often laugh at your own setbacks, failures, challenges, or mild suffering, either while they are occurring or after the fact? For me, it's yes. And then would you enjoy being on stage or speaking during a public event with a large, intimidating crowd, such as a commencement off script? For me, it's yes. Um, Doing stuff like this, same thing. I'm completely off script when I talk like this. I don't prepare presenter notes or anything like that. I I write notes sometimes to keep myself on track, but that's it. Um, but I rate that being able to laugh at yourself here is the most important factor. You definitely want that. So this is kind of falsifiable because it determines healthy versus not healthy, but it's on a uh four result test instead of eliminating. Like these are not that far apart, whereas I use a falsifiable one if there was a big difference between them. This is for relationship antagonism. The first question is, do you prefer relationships, including romantic and otherwise, with people who are intellectually equivalent or higher to you, or do you prefer relationships where you are the intellectual superior one? For me, I seek equivalent relationships where people who are smarter than me. I love learning. I love teaching. Um, but I like those kind of high level, complex conversations and deep conversations, stuff like that. But I definitely don't want to feel like I'm above or, whatever to anyone. Um, and then do you give more criticism than receive it from others? I mean, when it comes to like interpersonal stuff, no, I'm very nice and polite to everyone I encounter with. I'm not critical when I talk to people. Like I'm very nice. I'm low conflict. Um, Treat others with kindness, treat others how you want to be treated, kind of basic stuff. So not antagonistic. I am mildly like what I critique psychiatry and academia and politics, stuff like that. I'm a very big critic of our systems and of a lot of things. So I'm very critical, but not to individuals, but more like institutions, stuff like that. So I rate myself as having no antagonism. That's I'm very polite and kind when interacting with others generally. Um, and then the third question I have to determine whether or not someone's going to have those cluster B pathologies and emotional upheavals and problems of relationships. Do you enjoy your own company while alone? As in, you can keep independently, you can independently do fulfilling work and activities and keep yourself entertained without paying attention to others or having others pay attention to you. For me, it's yes. Um, I do admittedly like, doing stuff that people pay attention to and stuff like that, but I can definitely be offline and disconnect from all the social media news and all that kind of stuff and, do it for days and enjoy it. Especially if I'm like going up north vacationing and like going out in the wilderness. Yes, I will definitely just hang out in nature. I'm very in tune with my present moment. I'm very keep myself I find happiness very easy. And that's part of why I want to develop this is like I like my own company. I'm very happy. I'm very aware and control of like my moods and behaviors and stuff like that. And it's something I've been, from my own journey and just like knowing and caring about others and studying it and stuff like that. That's why I'm really putting a lot of attention in developing this because I think I'm living what I would like, what I want others to have in terms of mental and emotional health and stuff like that. So, um, and I can live it. So I think I myself capable of being able to teach it. Um, so yes, I'm self-motivated. And do I keep my personal problems to myself or do you keep your personal problems to yourself so you can heal them on your own instead of avoiding them or relying on others to help you with your emotional state or mood? Yes, I tend to keep my problems to myself. I'm not a complainer. Um, I mean, I complain sometimes, everyone does, but when it comes to the heavy stuff, I do my own self-reflection and my own inner work, and I don't like talking to people about my problems. Unless it's like, when I was in therapy a while back, like being able to talk with someone who I considered, and they considered me a peer too, because I'm really into psychology. So we talk about, things that are atypical in a therapist setting because they consider me really knowledgeable, and they'd often say like, "You're doing my work for me. You're my favorite patient." So uh, I but now I like the skills I learned there and in those sessions and with my own research, I'm able to like do it on my own instead of relying on someone else. Um, and I'm not sure like BetterHelp and all that stuff because you don't need a lot of credentials to be a therapist, especially with this stuff like BetterHelp and stuff that they're recommending. Like a, and there hasn't been a lot of like studies that I know of that are really conclusive about talk therapy. Um, so I'm not sure how helpful it really is. Um, especially with codependency being a main kind of psychiatric issue out there, it seems like it's just potential for another codependency. In a lot of ways if it's not done right. So, I thankfully had my own good experience and stuff like that, but that's not always the case. And there's a lot of they're making it easier and easier to just talk to someone about all your problems all the time. And it's like, mm, with bachelor's degrees too. You don't have to have more than a bachelor's degree to do therapy legally. So, um, but yeah, and even when I was in therapy before, I wouldn't go there upset trying to get them to elevate my mood or anything like that. Be like, oh, this is what I dealt with this week. What's your advice? Or here's how I'm approaching it. Do you think it's good or not? Whatever. I wouldn't go there like crying and being like, make me feel better, please. That wasn't me. I was always in a good mood and personable and stuff like that. So I would never go to them to like help me with my mood. I would go there to like, tackle problems in my relationships or tackle problems with like my own, self-growth and stuff like that. Um, so I don't know how others use therapy, but I use it in a very productive and like kind of peer-to-peer kind of way because of my vast interest and academic experience with psychology. So, um, but I imagine some people go there they want to feel bad and they want someone to make them feel better. And it's like, no, you got to learn how to make yourself feel good. Um, which I do want to develop my own kind of therapy and like use astrology as a focal point for doing it. I think it'd be really cool. But do something similar to DBT where it's like primarily a self-help kind of book, um, and then paired with a group therapy. I think group therapy is probably better than one-on-one therapy. Um, because it kind of it's a setup that doesn't let you like you're not going there to have them make you feel better. Although like going there might be like, put you in a good mood to go there, might, kind of naturally make you feel good to go there. That's a good thing. Um, but there's less kind of dependency on the environment because everyone has to take their time to share their perspective and all that. So it's more equal. And plus, like, they're probably going into less personal detail and personal information, which I think is healthier. Um, so I think group therapies are a good setting. And then the psychological emergency and crisis triage screening. I figure the biggest kind of like there's a lot of psychiatric conditions and emergencies described out there, but I wanted to locate kind of the big ones. Um, this one is resilience, exploitation, and confusion. Confusion can be other forms of like Alzheimer's, dementia, or other kind of neurocognitive diseases or conditions. Um, so I could probably do a better question than this in regards to confusion, but I do not trust or understand the intentions of the people who I'm most in contact with. So I wanted, like, I don't know what's going on, is what I wanted to kind of capture in that question. Like someone who would just be like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't know where I am, what I'm doing, what's going on, who you are, stuff like that. So I kind of wanted to capture that kind of confused state. And I thought kind of like the kind of neurocognitive uh, issues might be found with a question like that. Um, these are for people who can obviously have the mental capacity to answer the questions. So testing for a capacity for that, I wonder if that should be done or not. But if some people they don't, understand the question, that indicates some kind of neurological problem or emergency. But this is for test people who can answer questions and do understand what they're being told and stuff like that. So, everything is having clarity or being confused depending on how they answer that question. And that's the most important part. Like, do you know what's going on with people around? You know what's up with things. So, for me personally, I answer yes. Um, and then is the following statement true for you? I'm unconfident that my ability to keep myself safe is better than anyone else's ability to keep me safe. For me personally, it's a yes. But for this locates risk of exploitation, I think. Because if you don't feel comfortable keeping yourself safe compared to other people, like that is so much room for exploitation and being taken advantage of and being in an abusive situation and stuff like that. So this is kind of like an abuse exploitation locator question for me. Um, because if you can't keep yourself safe, it's kind of a cry for help. So this would, I think, locate a pretty acute emergency going on in their environment or with them. Either of these questions. And they could be ordered differently depending on, you know, what other professionals might think in terms of like, because I'm looking at this question might be like, would be a better X variable than Y variable. I'm not sure. But I rate both of these. If you don't understand what's going on with people around you, that's a problem. Vulnerable also to exploitation and being taken advantage of. You're just going with the flow, but don't know what's going on. Get caught up in something bad. So, because my theory is not just about like personal problems, it's about like there's social problems at play. Exploitation is one of them. And you gotta, screen for people who might be vulnerable to that. I think these factors locate that. Um, and then this one about suicide, homicide risk. I think anyone who is homicidal is also suicidal. Um, might not be for every case, but that's one of my kind of theories on here, like to test and see. But that everyone who's homicidal is also suicidal. I don't think you're really homicidal without some kind of suicide. I mean, you can be, that's why I put kind of a homicidal risk there too. But I think you're most at risk with homicide if you're also suicidal. Um, which I this question I think locates suicidality. So I do not care about my personal survival that much or living a healthy, happy, and fulfilling a long life. If that is true for you, you are hopeless, thus suicidal. So I wrote that as just indicating suicidality. Um, and then this question, I'll start a fight or be the first to get physically violent with another if I feel threatened or get into an argument. Um, so if you don't care about your life and you're kind of suicidal and then you're ready to fight as well, I would put someone who would test for that as the most doing something risky enough to get themselves killed, intentionally kill themselves, or kill someone else. If they're not trying to fight or getting violent, then that's just kind of an acute suicide risk, I believe. And then here, they do care about having a happy, healthy, fulfilling, long life. I think helps. That's why I don't rate it as very high. Rate it as mitigating instead of maladaptive. Maladaptive is the most severe. This is mitigating. Um, being the first to defend yourself or start a fight, I don't think is necessarily pathological. Um, whether or not it's like someone's ideal health, that's another question. Um, but I think it's healthy that we would defend our life when faced with if we're faced with a threat. It's healthiest to want to defend yourself rather than just lay down and die. The healthy reaction is that we want to survive, we want to live. So I don't necessarily being locate a willingness to fight back as a bad thing. But if someone like has a chip on their shoulder, um, that could be a indicator for a potentiality of violence. And then adaptive resilience is where I rate. I do care about living a happy, healthy, long, and fulfilling life. And then I really, when I'm faced with like conflict and stuff like that, I really try to fawn and mitigate and reduce the conflict as much as possible. So I don't start fights. I'll fight if I have to, but I try to avoid it if possible. Um, but I'll definitely defend myself. That's why I consider myself like in the psychopathy axis too. It's like I will defend myself if I have to. If I feel like this is going to escalate and you're going to become a threat, I'm going to become the bigger threat, let me tell you. But I'm really peaceful and low conflict and try not to get to that point. But if it comes down to it, I mean, I was homeless for over a year, so I dealt with, my fair share of survival problems. I was a maladaptive utility then, but I'm generally very peaceful and low conflict. And then this last one is for delusions. I was just talking a little about my last video, trying to figure out delusions that relate to things that we all have ideas about. So death, sleep, violence. I'm sure there's more. I just, can't think of it right now. But just kind of delusions around what possible delusions might someone have about death. That it doesn't really exist unless someone wants, kind of like stuff to mitigate fear surrounding death or stuff to mitigate fear surrounding violence. So it's like if you're too scared of death to deal with it, if you're too scared of violence to like deal with it and face its, existence or reality, you might have these delusions regarding death to make them more comfortable things for you. So, I think there's a lot to be said about delusions, considering we live in a world with so much misinformation and so much disinformation, which I distinguish as different from misinformation. It isn't intentionally being deceptive, is what I call disinformation. So we're given so much information to put into our belief system that's false. So it's like we're being fed delusions constantly. If you're not like, a really critical thinker and take things with a grain of salt and really understand how to like understand things for yourself and have your own kind of epistemology develop, like people just are delusions are so much more common than is really talked about. Do we live in a simulation? No, I think physics says we live in a physical reality. I would call, believing in simulation theory a delusion. I would call believing in any religion a delusion. Any of the Abrahamic religions, at least. I would rate those as delusions. And not necessarily healthy. Um, so I try to capture delusions that are about shared experiences. So we're going to have ideas about death and violence. Um, and I trying to imagine like I've never experienced delusions like these before, but I'm trying to imagine, okay, if someone was really too scared of death and couldn't cope with it, what fundamental belief would they have about death that would like make them easy to fall asleep at night? Fundamental belief about violence that they see on TV, attributed to like war or conflict or gang violence, anything like that. So do you believe that death and sleep refer to the exact same thing, or that they're different, but someone can only die if they want to, or otherwise suicidal? Um, People can die regardless if they want to or not. And death and sleep are certainly not the same thing. Um, so the correct answer for that is no. The diluted answer for that is yes. So the rate is having death delusions if they think death and sleep are the same thing, or they think that you can only die if you want to die. Otherwise, people don't die. And those are just like kind of two ideas I thought of, like what when people tell themselves to sleep at night, they're really scared to die. Well, that could be a lie they tell themselves. And then second question, do you believe violence associated with poverty and war, such as murder and physical mutilation, is always fake, even when presented as nonfiction, such as on the news media? Um, I put that as the less impactful question because I feel like it'd be easier for people to have delusions about violence. Um, Especially with how we're educated and indoctrinated. Um, because like there's so much violence on TV, might be hard to kind of like disentangle violence from real or to like take beliefs that, if people are relatively privileged and they're insulated from like crime and violence in their neighborhoods, and they live that privileged life and they just see it on TV and, there's not a big difference in variation between fact and fiction when it comes to those stuff. Like look at Band of Brothers on HBO. I haven't watched it yet, but it's meant to look real. It's meant to look realistic, like as if it was happening. So it's like I could see where that confusion, especially in like children and stuff like that, might come up. But I consider that to be the less severe delusion than the delusion about death being different than it is. But I can see how these might develop given how diluted our media can be and our education system can be. In terms of delineating from fact, fake, misinformation, and disinformation. So those are my scores. No delusions, adaptive resilience, adaptive resilience. So I get the health scores for all of them. And with those, I did the trypophobia, disgust, and gag reflex in my last video. I can review it again really quick. And like I said before, the narcissism borderline are the controls for this experiment. I have theories about antisocials and histrionics. And I'll say this survey stuff is a really cool way to like if we can really classify people in one of these four traits and they relate to them, like what are things like this that we'll find, like trypophobia and things like that that are different for each of the four types. I think it'd be really easy to identify trends using my methodology and really cool. Um, so for the experimental group, I would do one for so I think antisocial, which is HS1, and histrionic, which is HS3. They're going to have different types of trypophobia. I think histrionic will have both types, and then antisocial will have just the animal type. And I'm not sure about narcissist and borderlines, but I just because there's a thing with antisocial and just like the small animals thing, how cute animals can look repulsive and scary to these types. So, because to me, I think that kind of delineates like cognitive science versus psychology. Because psychology is like moods, behaviors, perceptions, decision making in the industry. Um, and this is more about like how your body, the psychosomatic kind of reaction, how your body is physically reacting to stimuli. So it's more about like um kind of the reflexes and functions present within the body rather than like mood and behavior and stuff like that can be a little bit more fluid and responsive to the environment, whereas like this is a kind of consistent phenomena that will happen. I don't know, it's really hard to like delineate cognitive science and psychology. None of the experts agree on anything, so it's all right. Um, Image set one, I might do a different one with the mushrooms because this is like a redundant photo. Another lotus pod, similar is a lotus pod, by the way. Peaceful flowers. Yeah, right. Look at that. And bird of paradise. Not my favorite. Birds. I'm sure they're sweet birds, but they just give me a trypophobic reaction. So S, does this evoke uncomfortable feelings of repulsion, disgust, or the urge to look away? And then for both. And then so I think TS3 will be histrionic types, and then TS1, which kind of matches with their math can work out really well if you really like are stringent with the logic. The high stress personality one will be complex trypophobia only, and then the histrionics, high stress personality 3 will be the both trypophobia types. Um, yeah, so I think high stress 1 will right here, and high stress 3 will right here. I didn't even mean to do it like that, but just when you, like I said, when you use logic really precisely, stuff like that just happens, and it's convenient to keeping stuff straightforward and logical. Um, so I have both those pictures, and I purposely over the years like have painted and like exposed myself to images that evoke that to try to desensitize myself, but it's not completely. If I've actually gained trypophobia over the past couple of years, I gained like the kind of animal trypophobia. It's not severe. I still feed ducks, love animals, but like I notice it now. I'm like, hmm. And then this is just do smells only of feces, urine, vomit, and decay generally make you gag, dry, heave, or vomit for me? Yes. And then do images or sounds only of these things? Yes. Me saliva too. That's why I developed my uh R&D idea to do QR codes. The patient could just spit at home, take a QR picture. We never have to see it. We can trust it's like medically done and done correctly. Because you have a control there if the test like messes up or something, you could like indicate it in the QR code. And the cool thing that I designed. So I don't think this has been done yet. I think this is a novel idea. Where if you put a code on there and then like how these would you get like red line or whatever here or wherever, you could just make it like a black square instead. So it could like fill in square. This is not a QR code, by the way. I wanted to make sure it wouldn't actually link to somewhere. Um and but yeah, you could have it so the test like, if dopamine, no elevated levels of dopamine. So maybe you would have this panel go black if the test is done correctly. So it's not so it's a valid test, not an invalid test. So this one would turn black. And then um no elevated cortisol, dopamine, or fight or flight neurotransmitters or hormones, and then elevated, you know, uh, 10 to 20 micrograms per whatever. And this is 2140 micrograms, and like whatever the range is, just scale it, have them show up as black. So it changes the QR code and have the QR code like, you know, if you like open up an app which has like the research in it, 'cause it can do research stuff like that in apps really easily. Just scan the QR code and the QR code will have like different, squares based on the test results. So it can just instantly indicate the basis of the QR code will be like this is for this test or whatever, and then whatever results I have will give the actual rating. That should be relatively easy to do. But it's something I would love to do because I don't want to collect spit samples. No, no, thank you. But they just take a little QR picture. Don't have to see any of the details of that. That's why I had that idea. But yes, hearing it, seeing it, smelling it, I'm done. I might vomit myself. I'm bad at that. So I can never like go into medicine and treat patients because too sensitive. But this is how I would gather results for my hypothetical study. Oh, that's not what I'm. And then reproductive codependency, I just made it a few weeks ago. When you see a small child or sentimental things relating to children, such as clothes, cartoons, photographs, or toys, you get an emotional, physical desire to have children of your own. I suspect members of my family have had this desire because I do not have it. Kids are cute. I enjoy the ones I'm related to and the children of my friends, but not for me. Never wanted kids. Still don't. Mother said I would change my mind. She was wrong ultimately and didn't never change my mind on that. I've always felt that way. So I've never had children and I don't never intend on having children, so no reproductive codependency or intent. So to me, there's a lot of pressure to have children, and there's a lot of historical significance in that. City-states and kingdoms wanted their populations to grow so they could have armies. That's kind of the whole political history of why politics has gotten involved with reproduction. And it really started with that, is that they wanted armies for their kingdoms or whatever. And so I don't think politics and reproduction should be involved. They should, separate church and state, separate reproduction and state. And so I think there's kind of this like pressure, social pressure and maybe even a physical pressure to have children unnecessarily. It's, you as someone who chose not to have kids, I've received a lot of criticism for that. Like it's not seen as normal. And that's part of the problem too. It should be seen as completely normal to not want to have kids, whether you're a guy or a girl. But there's this big sexist expectation on women to have kids. And so I think there's like problems with pressures and social issues. And like this whole theory is about social problems causing, behavioral problems. And so I don't think it's necessarily healthy to get sentimental when you see kids. If it's like your own kid, sure. And that's what I wanted to like kind of specify where it's not like your kid. But like if it's your own kid or your grandkid, of course I'm thinking it's adorable. I like my nephew's clothes are so cute. I love them. But like seeing children in general doesn't like give me the urge to have kids. And I've heard people talk over the years all the time talk about it, like how it gives them baby fever or whatever. I'm just like, oh, what fever? No fever. But I don't think it's necessarily healthy to have like to see it and then have that kind of like, oh, I want to mimic that. I want that for myself. Like I don't think that's healthy. But more research should be done on that because it's a very touchy subject, even taking my stance, which I would say is a healthy one, not the to not have pressure, like negative associations with not having children, I think is a healthy thing. Because like we don't, we live outside of biology in a lot of ways that are like structural and bad, like with money and stuff like that. We have this kind of artificial carrying capacity where it's like survivability isn't based on natural factors that like determine evolution, but based on like, can you survive and, make money in capitalism to survive? Before capitalism, it was can you live in the elements and live among people, and then capitalism came or trade or whatever. And then it's like, we have to fit those standards instead of natural standards for our own evolution and like thriving and all that stuff, which, like I said, very negative impacts. Because, with the advent of agriculture and modern society and stuff like that, like, you know, how animal populations exist in nature, like, the bee population, for example, is looked at in ecology is of great importance because it is, because they're pollinators and they help with our food systems and stuff like that. Um, but like most bees, follow historical reproductive tendencies that their species have always done. And like, we don't need to be so serious about reproduction or like need it so bad. We can be more careful about it and more selective with reproduction because like um, we're not on the food chain. I mean, we're apex on the food chain, but we're not threatened. We don't have to worry about predators. We don't have to worry about the elements. We keep ourselves sheltered. We don't have those like threats to our survival that the other animals do in the animal kingdom. They have a lot less survivability, so they need to reproduce more. We have peak survivability, so we should, reproduce more carefully and more intentionally and, within healthier family units is what I think. But yeah, reproductive opinions can be very contentious, but those are the start of mine. Um, so that I think wraps up about all of the surveys I have published right now. I have a lot more behind the scenes that I'm working on. Um, but that's just kind of the overview of how I form these questions, the logic I'm using, the math behind it, and like how using the kind of Boolean math and the different variable logic, you could create more questions to locate things in a very methodological and scientific way. So, um, once again, thank you so much, especially if you've made it all the way through to the end of this video. I greatly appreciate it. Greatly appreciate having a reason to make these videos. So grateful for the email I got this morning. That was really validating. So I really hope this gets some academic accreditation so I can really get going on doing actual survey research instead of just developing the methodologies for them. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video I make for the series.